I'm Elizabeth Thompson, and I am the Executive Director of the Wells-Built Museum of African American History and Culture on South Street. How I would describe the Wells-Built Museum, I think it is one of Orlando's hidden gems. The building that we are housed in was originally the first hotel in Orlando that would provide lodging for African Americans. As a Black traveler in the 20s or 30s or 40s, if you wanted to stay at a hotel, then you were going to stay at the Wells-Built Hotel at the time. In 2001, it was converted to a museum, and our sole purpose is to educate and celebrate the African American contributions to the Orlando, Central Florida, and Florida communities. A lot of times there are stories and champions that we don't know about and we don't hear about, and it is our privilege every day to be able to bring those untold stories to the public. When you step into the Wells-Built, you're first going to come in, and the first thing we talk about is the building itself. Because of course, you have to be able to negotiate, why is this 90-plus-year-old two-story brick building sitting on South Street, flanked by the Amway Arena and the city soccer stadium a little ways down the road? And we like to be able to tell the story of one of the area's first Black physicians who came and saw a need for a hotel and then went about the process of building that hotel. So we talk about the building itself. We talk about it is a two-story building. We talk about the hotel rooms. We talk about some of the businesses that were housed in the bottom floor of the museum. And so that's one of the first things that we talk about and the first things that you'll see. Another thing that we have are photo reprints of the Negro Motorist Green Book. And that was an essential travel directory for African Americans at the time. It showed very well where businesses that welcomed African Americans and the African American dollar were located. And the Wells-Built Hotel was listed in the Green Book. And so you'll see a photo reprint of the cover of one of the years of the Green Book, and you'll also see the pages where the Wells-Built Hotel was listed. There's a lot of information about significant firsts here in Orlando. So we have pictures of trailblazers and waymakers here in Orlando and Central Florida, and we have information about some of those people, some of the luminaries who have paved the way for us to go the places we go and do the things that we do and hold the careers that we hold. So these are all things that you will see. We have artifacts and memorabilia from some of the ways that African Americans would make a living in the 30s and 40s and 50s. So Dr. Wells was the second Black physician to come to Orlando. The first was Dr. Callahan. Dr. Wells and his wife moved from Tennessee, where he graduated from Meharry. They moved directly to Orlando, and that would have been in 1917. And as he came, at the time, this was definitely deep segregated times. So he was going to be responsible for seeing African American patients solely. And so these are going to be a lot of people who were participating in agribusiness, because of course Florida was founded on agriculture. And these were going to be teachers, custodial workers, whomever. But if you were an African American and you needed health care, you were going to go to one of these two Black physicians. So he's going about building his practice, and he notices that the area is growing, there's economy coming, and though there are hotels, none of the hotels in Orlando at that time would rent rooms to African Americans. So he was someone who consistently throughout his career, wherever he saw a need, he sought to fulfill that need. And that is exactly what the Wells-Built Hotel was for him. It was the fulfillment of a need for the African American community. He actually had to self-finance the building of the structure as well, because at the time, though he was a physician, he couldn't get what we would now define as commercial funding, couldn't get a loan. So he had to, little by little, take the proceeds from his medical practice and put it into the construction of the hotel. What I think is very important is if you were just to move to Orlando, if you were new and you were to ask about Paramore, there is one perception. But what is important is to be able to understand the thriving neighborhood, the interconnected neighborhood that Paramore once was. And it's important to understand that within that neighborhood, within that area, you had physicians that lived there and lawyers that lived there, and you had custodial workers, and you had educators, and you had people who worked in the orange groves or the sugarcane fields or what have you. So it's very important to be able to talk about the rich history that exists, and it's important to be able to talk about the collective economy that existed in Paramore as well. And one of the reasons it's so important is that is how we can look and make a way forward, is by looking to see what has been successful in the past. I always say that for me, history is a guidebook. Whatever we are going through, whether socially, economically, personally, someone before us has navigated this. And we can learn how best to go forward if we simply take a look back and see what was successful or even what wasn't successful. And that way we can make a plan. And I think that is why history is so important. That and the things that have happened previously impact us today, impact us even in our daily lives. And it's important to be able to know what those things were, what those circumstances were, and how it is that we are being impacted. So I think it is essential to preserve history, to talk about history, to have those discussions, because it gives us a guidebook to go forward.